Hello, welcome to the Eclectic Reader. Listen to great books and stories while you use your eyes and hands for other things. Now here's your host, Madison Mason.
Hello, it's Madison Mason. We have reached the backstretch of the Gray Quarry Boys. We're at Chapter 34. Enjoy. The Gray Quarry Boys, Chapter 34, Valerie. Barbecue smoke floated down, oily and sweet, from the pits on the hill, as Frankie Sinatra wafted across the lake, telling people what it's like when you're young at heart. The air was alive with music, splashing, and the voices of hundreds of kids at the tops of their lungs, promising their mothers not to get a cramp and drown if they went back in right after lunch. Fat kids cannonballed smaller ones, leaving them bobbing under the diving platforms on inner tubes. Kids plummeted down the big slide, yelling and giggling, smacking the agitated surface, and held each other under. Eddie took his half-hour lunch, but spent most of it picking up trash and bottles and watching little kids splashing in the shallows. He liked kids. He liked their innocence. Then he climbed the tower and took a couple dives off the high board, a swan and a jackknife. He could do those pretty well, had nice form. But his problem was still in his backflip. No matter what, he always either overshot or splatted flat on his back, knocking out his breath. He just couldn't manage to get it right as much as he watched David Hansen when he came to the lake. David Hansen cut the water like a stiletto. He had such perfect form that he seldom left a splash, even after a triple gainer. He dived in the Olympics in Helsinki. Eddie knew that was in Finland. He knew everything about David Hansen and his silver medals. He tried the dread backflip again, imagining he was David, but he hit so hard on the back of his head it gave him a headache. He pulled himself onto the wall and lay in the sun to work on his tan for Valerie, and wait for his head to stop hurting. His ears stung, too. When his break was over, he returned to his place at the counter to watch the teenagers dance and hang out around the jukebox. They wore their teenage like a badge, an arrogance earned by a birthday setting them apart from mere children. He had friends who regarded themselves as some form of royalty. Royal pains, he thought. He promised himself never to be like that for any reason. Eddie would always be cool to kids. But he had no problems with teens at the lake. He was authority there, and they respected him, though they still kept it to themselves. One step out of line, one word from him, and they were out on their butts, and they knew it. It was a fringe benefit of the job. Tommy Earnhardt wouldn't even question if Eddie said somebody was out of line. They'd be gone. Eddie was the boss here. Two girls were jitterbugging to honky-tonk, and their bare sandy feet scritched as they twirled across the concrete pad, their movements precise and rehearsed. Neither could have found a boy to dance with as well as they danced together. Each girl was right there as the other made a turn, a move, a dip, each like a piece of the clockwork, never missing a note. Two slim country girls in bikinis, eyes closed, locked on the beat. They would open their eyes and laugh in conspiracy at something they alone had felt happen that no one else saw as they spun and swayed. They had put in hours and hours of practice, door locked and volume up, kid sisters in exile. A dripping boy hopped up on the wall and brushed his crew cut hard with his hand, spraying his red-headed buddy in the face. They laughed and tussled, knocking a couple bottles off the wall into the sand. Red threw his cherry snow cone onto his buddy's naked chest and took off running for the lake. Crewcut gasped and set out after him, baggy wedge shorts exposing the white cleft of his butt end as he ran. Eddie came from behind the counter to clean up the mess and put away the bottles. He didn't mind. It was his job. He took pride in it. As far as he was concerned, at $3.50 a day, he was well paid. He finished wiping the scarlet liquid from the bench, hopped up on the short wall where the two kids had been, and let the sun warm his back, while Nat King Cole pled for his love to answer me for the 100th time that day, and explained just what sin he was guilty of. He was floating in his mind when soft hands covered his eyes, and the musical lilt of a honeyed southern accent opened his heart like a gift. Bet you can't guess who. He tried to turn to see, but the cool velvet hands held him firmly, and the voice whispered in his ear, sending goose pimples down his neck and arms and all the way into his legs. You gotta guess. He didn't have to guess. The pounding in his chest knew who. He couldn't breathe. That told him who. Who else? He tried to think of something devastatingly clever to say when he heard, "If you guess right, I'll give you a prize." "Valerie," he gasped. "You win," she laughed, and he smelled jasmine as her smooth softness brushed his cheek, and he melted into a nervous mush. Her lips smooched his cheek as she let go of his eyes. He blinked in the sunlight, his heart thundering in his chest as she came into focus, beautiful, warm, and full of life, her magnificent face not 2 inches from his. Valerie Sands floated around and stood before him, ebony hair tumbling in dark clouds over the cream coffee tan of her flawless shoulders. She laughed merrily, her wet rose lips parting to reveal teeth of polished luster and the soft pink of her tongue and throat within. Her eyes arched in joy at his unease, soft blue covered for the moment by the rich fur of her lashes. In her black coal of California, with a pair of white shorts poured over her bottom, she was splendorous and well aware, but so real, so simple. Set on a figure that caused dreams, her face was exquisite beyond movie star perfection, and her arms felt cool as watered silk around Eddie's neck as Valerie Sands hugged him with genuine affection. "How's my little pal?" She loved him openly and purely, and for reasons unknown even to Eddie, had decided to take him under her wing as mascot, escort, her little chaperone. It put him in a position where any other man would have gladly been, and he trotted along behind her, happily awaiting her slightest whim. He adored the very beach upon which Valerie Sand's sweet little feet walked, and the water that caressed her angelic body when she swam. "Fine, I guess," he blushed. He tried not to stare at the thin gold cross that lay gently just above her heavenly cleavage, where tanned breasts rode on the sweetness of her breath. He knew he was pretty young to think about things like that, but still, he did. He forced his mind back to the more pristine aspects of his love for her. After all, she was 19, and he was just a kid, he told himself. Are you going swimming?" he stammered, awed at his lack of cool. Why couldn't he think around her? "Well, that's why I'm here, honey, and to see you. Why don't you play us some music?" She dropped quarters in his palm and pinched his cheek. It was only then that he noticed Sandra standing next to her. He smiled and hopped down off the wall. "Hey, Sandra, how you doing?" he asked. Sandra stared, bored, toward the water. He knew what she was looking for. Sandra was what his mother referred to as boy crazy. "Hey," Sandra snorted. She gnawed and popped her gum and didn't care if Eddie lived or died. He plopped quarters in the jukebox and punched the songs, took Valerie's purse and shorts and gave her the number pin for her basket. He watched jealously while young men came, drawn from the water to the concession stand as if some announcement had been made that money was being given away at the jukebox. Valerie was surrounded with an army of young studs pretending to just have happened upon her. Sandra flirted outrageously as the music blasted. Eddie heard one tattooed guy yell out, "Hey, Valerie, I heard you went out with Richie Stargill the other night." "Yeah, I had to fight for my life." Then another wag yelled, "Your life or your honor?" She responded with, "Yeah, well, you know." This brought a thunderstorm of laughter. Eddie was jealous, plain and simple. He went behind the concession stand to work before he wound up starting a fight with one of these muscular jerks and getting his butt beat. He hated these bozos sniffing and snorting around his love like the apes they so clearly were. He restocked potato chips and hauled away the cases of empty bottles to storage behind the building. He stood in the shade, sorting the bottles into their proper cases, and jumped at the sight of the dead water moccasin laying a foot away where Tommy had carelessly thrown it. Flies buzzed around its crushed head as they worked their function in the food chain. It was dead, all right, but it still gave him creeps. He jumped again when he heard a loud, insistent ringing of the clothing stand bell. Its high-pitched ping cut through the music of the jukebox. He stacked the last crate on the side of the building and went back around the corner. A solidly built 20-year-old man stood pounding on the bell. A flat-top haircut crowned his handsome face, brown with sun and arrogant with contempt. His muscles rounded out the skin-tight sleeveless shirt. His hard body said football and weights. He consciously ignored the others as Eddie came around the counter and kept hitting the bell as if challenging someone to say something about it. Eddie timed it perfectly and snatched the bell away as his hand slammed down on the counter. "I heard you the first time, Richie. Thanks." "And why the hell didn't you come the first time, turd? I've been standing here for an hour." Eddie glared at Richie Stargill and shoved him a basket. There was no point in confrontation with him. He'd seen Stargill at work before. He was bitter mean. He wouldn't hesitate to hit a smaller kid. Richie grinned insolently and headed for the shower room. Valerie winked at Eddie. "Charming, isn't he?" "I want to be just like him when I grow up," Eddie wised off, hoping Richie was out of earshot. It wouldn't do to be overheard. His crack brought an explosion of laughter from the older kids, and he grinned self-consciously. The happy wanderer flopped onto the turntable and out of the speakers. Eddie liked this song, even though he thought it was kind of silly, because the chorus had her name in it. Valerie, Valera, Valerie, Valera, ha, 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 and so on. Every time he heard it, she came to mind, and he could spend hours thinking about her. If he could only get her away from these guys. His reverie was broken by a runny-nosed little redhead kid covered in sand holding his little crotch and pointing to the shower room. "The toilet broke," the kid lisped. Eddie grabbed the plumber's helper and headed into the shower. Some kid was always flushing something foreign down: pop bottles, bathing suits, a shoe. As he entered the changing room, he stopped and stared, unbelieving at what he saw. Richie Stargill stood atop one of the changing benches, stark naked, and dancing, his feet spread wide apart. He was singing Valerie, Valera, and as he sang, he ground his hips round and bumped them like some rude dame in a county fair burlesque. The hard plates of his athlete's body gyrated and pumped, causing his member to twirl in a circle like a tassel on a stripper's boob. Eddie had never in his life seen anything so lewd or perverse. Richie Stargill held his arms over his head and ground his hips sensually like a woman, while his penis counted time. Then he reversed the action and the pendulum swung the other way. Every moral fiber in Eddie's existence was offended by the decadent scene playing out before him. To top it all off, the brawny creep would stroke it and sing Valerie whenever the chorus came around. Eddie wanted to kill this guy, he was so disgusted. The little red-headed kid picked his nose and stared in open wonder. "Cut it out, Richie," Eddie blurted. "Piss off, rat," grinned Richie nonchalantly. "I mean it, goddammit. I'll tell Tommy." Eddie was furious. For this muscle-bound lout to behave this lascivious way in front of kids, in the sanctity of the lake, and soil the holy name of Valerie was more than he could stomach. "Suck this, you little queer." Richie held out his baloney in offensive invitation. That was all it took. Eddie went nuts. All fear and reason left him. He approached the dragon like a knight in defense of his lady. "You fucking asshole," he ground. "You fucking asshole," Richie mimicked in a whiny voice, laughing. "You fucking asshole." That was all he managed to get out before Eddie brought the hard red rubber of the toilet plunger down on Richie's offending instrument like Stan Musial hitting a 3-run homer. Richie let out a howl from the caves of hell and fell onto the hard concrete floor screaming bloody murder. Several guys came running in to see Richie holding what was left of his bruised weenie, his face scarlet as he lunged for Eddie. "You rotten little son of a bitch," he screeched. Eddie shot out of the dressing room. Richie would have followed him out stark naked and killed him in front of 100 witnesses if the other guys hadn't held him back. As Eddie bounded out into the music, Plumber's helper still in hand, he could hear Richie's enraged voice. It terrified him. "I'm gonna kill you, you little fuck," he bellowed. Valerie turned, concern in her eyes. "What's going on, honey?" "Oh, nothing," he said casually, his heart pounding. "I'm just cleaning up." His chest was heaving so hard he thought his heart would break through his ribs.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of The Eclectic Reader. Please go on to the next numbered episode to continue. Also, check us out on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. If you'd like to help support the project, you can donate under Madison Mason at Patreon. And please, check out our website, kltkrdr.com, for more information.
Hi, this is Madison Mason. I want to personally thank you for listening to The Eclectic Reader and invite you to share your experience, your thoughts, and your suggestions. We have many great books lined up for the future, but if you have requests for anything that is in the public domain, please email us at kltkrdr@gmail.com.
kltkrdr@gmail.com